Thank you all for coming. My name's Leonard Bruce. I'm sorry, I'm running around a lot. Some of the tech folks weren't able to be here, so I'm like running up the stairs 15 times to do the camera and figure out like the technology. So technology, everyone. Yeah, no, it's good. I appreciate it. So I am going to say apologies. I'm starting out a little bit sweaty. I'm going to come down a little bit, and I'm going to work towards it. But I'm really grateful for everyone being here. I'm also a little bit stuck behind this podium. As you can see, I've got a couple of wires all everywhere, and so I'm doing my best. I'm going to try to get out of here a little bit as I do the talk. But I did just want to recognize I am kind of like over in the corner here. But I really appreciate everyone coming out. Yeah, great to see some friendly faces, folks that I know. For new friends who are coming out, I hope you enjoy the conversation and the talk. My plan for right now is I'm going to be going through my talk, which I'm hoping is maybe 40 to 45 minutes. And then afterwards, I want to have some time for Q&A. I don't think that I'll go until 8 o'clock. My original intention was to have my 3D printer up showing some of the work that I've done. Again, the tech support kind of put me behind on that. So I do have some of the models that I've created over there. When when the talk is over, you're free to go and take a look at them. And we'll just go ahead and get started. So again, thanks all for being here. So to get started, before I get into this talk, I want to talk about what's the point of it. So as you're thinking about the words that I'm saying, as you're thinking about the stories that I'm telling, I really want you to think about what's the point of kind of being here in the first place. The way that I think about a lot of stuff from the work that I do, especially around history and historical revitalization, is really kind of three things that I think about. How to expose more folks. So one of the things I think about a lot is how do I get more people aware of the resources that are already out there, the stuff that is publicly available, the stuff that they can access themselves if they just know where to look. So a lot of times our history, our knowledge is locked behind archives in universities, archives in museums. And so one of the things I think a lot about is how do we take that information and make it more publicly available to the community so that community members can learn what was talked about before and kind of move on to the next point. The other thing that I think a lot about with my projects and the work that I do is how do I inspire folks to also create? So the stuff that I am doing, I start and I don't always finish all of these projects. A lot of them are works in progress, but my hope is that they will inspire other folks to think about how they can interact with our history and how they can create content themselves to kind of showcase history and connect with it themselves. And finally, and this is one of the reasons I'm here for this talk, and one of the reasons that I like doing this work is I really like to listen. So I have a lot of mentors here in the community that I've grown up with, that I've connected with through my work and through my life. And I love talking with them. I share my ideas for these projects with them first and foremost, so that I can get some ideas from them. I like to listen to hear, am I going in the right direction? But everyone has a different opinion. So one of the other reasons I wanted to come up here and do this talk, and I was really excited about it, was to have a dialogue around these projects as well as other projects that I could be doing. How do people feel about them? What are some thoughts that they have? What do they want to see? What are some dangers that I should steer clear of? And so that's kind of what I'm here today to talk about as I go through some of these projects. I'm going to warn you in the beginning, some of them, there's like a lot of stuff there. And I will have time at the end where I can go through them because I know like I'm a very data-oriented person. I use technology a lot. I use databases a lot. And so that's a lot of the work that I do is around databases. But I'm working on trying to make these things more accessible for everyone. So with that, I'm going to move on. Before I get into the projects though, part of what I want to do is foundation set and talk about one of the reasons I think a lot about the work that I'm doing. I'm glad I put this slide in. So before we get into that, I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself, my bad. My name is Leonard Bruce. And I'm originally from here in the community. I'm Akimalatham. I grew up in District 4, Lower Santan, over on Hilltop and Shuttle. I've been around the community for a long time, so I know some folks have seen me around. My father is Robert Bruce, and my mother is the late Beverly Gerla. Um, and so a couple of things about me just before we like get too far into it. So I've spent about 10 years in tribal government. I worked with Gila River. I worked in employment and training. I've worked in the community manager's office. I've worked with the Department of Environmental Quality. And in that time, I've done a lot of work with different departments, with different partners, and it's been really enjoyable for me to be back here in the community. I grew up in the community originally. We moved here when I was about 5, maybe 6 years old, and I lived here until I was about 16. So total, I've probably been in and around the community for most of my life. Just for the sake of knowing what my path was and why I kind of think very academically a lot of times, and I know that's a fault sometimes, but I did spend time at ASU, both with learning sociology as well as learning science and technology policy. So a lot of my background does come from academia. Some of the work that I did do is I did work on international teams, specifically with folks in Australia, learning about Aboriginals as well as Maori and some of the work they do on data sovereignty. And some of the work that I did was down here at U of A, also with the tribal professional cohort, similarly around indigenous data sovereignty and nation building. And finally, I'm also part of a kind of working group around artificial intelligence and thinking about how that is implemented in communities of color, in indigenous communities, and what are some of the risks associated with it, and what are some of the benefits that we might see with that. So as I'm talking about my journey, that's one of the things I want you to keep in mind is I'm coming from it as a very, I'm a nerd. Like one of the words I use a lot on my Facebook when I invited folks out was come out and take a look at some of my nerd stuff. I don't think that's a pejorative. I think we can all be data nerds, data warriors, etc. But I use it to describe myself because I really think that a lot of the work that I am doing is nerdy, and I'm okay with that. I do also, let me get that off of there so it's not covering up the screen out. But I do want to show my website, leonardbruce.com. You can search for Leonard Bruce and GRIC in Google and you'll probably find it. That's my personal website. A lot of these projects either are on this website or my intention is to put them on this website soon so that it makes it more easily available for community members. I'm also self-employed at the moment under my company is Tribal Data Works. You don't need to worry about it too much, but I have it on my slide in case anyone's interested. Right on. So before we get really into the projects, I want to talk about my journey and my family. So I'm going to contextualize some of this as we're moving on, but I want to talk about my great-grandma. So this is a picture of her, Annie Susanna Ramon Bott. She's a grandma on my mother's side. And so she was born somewhere around 1900. She passed in 1980. I was born in 88. I should have put my birthday on my slide so that I can kind of contextualize the timeline. But she passed away about 8 years before I was born. Some of the things about her. So as I've found in the family history that I've done in talking with my family members, she lived in the community pretty much her whole life. She grew up here. She stayed here. She didn't travel a lot. Some of the travel that she did do was like down to TO, but that's not, they didn't do as much travel back then as colonization had some interesting effects on the way that we traveled around. But one of the things that I really, is a story that I heard from my uncle before he passed and talking about her was she was an expert basket weaver. This picture, from what I've heard, is from a book where she talks with researchers about her basket making, about some of the techniques she has, about some of the designs that she has. And that's something that our family talks about a lot. She was a homemaker. So again, a lot of O'odham women back in the 1900s through 1980s, it was really encouraged to be a homemaker. Like I think most women in society, it was the men farmed, the men did hunting, they did warfare back in the early to late 1800s. And women stayed at home taking care of the kids. Even when you look at some of the economic programs that were going on with workforce training, that was the same. Men were sent into mechanical engineering, sent into radioactive engineering out in California, and women were sent to typist school, they were sent to how to do homemaking, etc. So my grandmother was a homemaker. She took care of 8 children, which blows my mind because I have 3 and I feel like, whoa, that's a lot. But one of the things that I think a lot about with her is that she worked with these researchers on basket weaving and thought a lot about and shared a lot of our history and information that she knew. So I want to move on from that. But I want you, again, to keep in mind, she was in the community for her whole life. So I want to talk about my grandma, Eula Gerla Bot. So this is a picture of my grandma. I'm like, man, I love these old pictures. I'm really thankful for my sister who found these and shared them with me. And it's really strange to see her looking so young versus when I see her in the pictures that I remember her as, where she has a much different hairstyle. But my grandma on my mom's side, she was born about 1931. She passed in 96. And so again, I was born in 1988. So when she passed, I was maybe 8 years old. I was still very young. And when we had moved out here to the community, we lived here maybe 2 to 3 years that I really got to share time with her. Before that, she would come and visit our family, but I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about my mom. As part of this story, I want to talk about my grandma. So my grandma, she left the community very young. So when she was about in her middle school years, like maybe 10 to 12 years old, she was sent out to a school for the blind. So she was sent out with some of her other siblings down to Tucson. So she left the community, she went down to Tucson, and she went to the school for the blind with her family. It was kind of like a boarding school. They spent most of their time at the school, and they went out and they visited with family members who lived down in the TO area. After she went to school, she did not come back to the community. So what she did was she stayed down in that area. She became a hairdresser, and she was a hairdresser at a local Army base down in Fort Pachuca, yes, and down in Tucson. So that's where she met my grandpa. And she did a really good job with his hair, and they got married, and she became an Army wife. And that's kind of what her role was a homemaker. They moved all around the country. So they moved to Georgia, where the stories that she tells, again, this is secondhand because this is coming from my uncle. The stories she tells is like, that was probably one of her worst experiences going down to Georgia because there was a lot of racism in Georgia at that time. But also one of the things she talks about is the experience of getting cut off from folks who knew how to speak her language. So even when she went down to the school of the blind, she was with her family, she was able to talk with some of her family members. Once she left, most of that was cut off. They moved all around. They moved to Oklahoma, they moved to Alaska. They moved back here to the community for just a short couple of years, and then they moved up to Chandler. So my mom, when she was born, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, she was in the community for a couple of years during her early childhood, but in first grade, she lived up in Chandler, and she lived up there for the rest of her life. Well, for the rest of her childhood, I should say. Again, big family. So my grandma had 7 kids. So I have 6 aunts and uncles, and most of them are passed now. I have 3 left out of those 6, so 7 because my mom also passed. But again, she left my life when I was around 8 years old. I didn't have a lot of time to talk with her to kind of understand and hear some of the cultural learnings that she had. I want to talk about my mom real quick. And then I'm going to get to the point of this as well. So my mom, Beverly Bruce Bott, Beverly Begay Gerla, she had a lot of last names. She married a couple times. But she was born in the 60s. So I want to contextualize her life journey of living in the 60s, growing up in the 60s and the 70s, in Chandler, outside of the community. Some of the stories that I hear about from my family members was they didn't grow up learning the language. They didn't grow up speaking the language. They didn't grow up really talking about history or some of our legends and stories because my grandma didn't want to do that. So she believed that we were living in this Anglo world. That's something that you need to learn and deal with and assimilate, which I think was a lot of people's frame of reference at that time, especially as they moved out into this diaspora and they moved outside of the community. So for my mom, she lived outside the community for most of her life. She was also a homemaker. So in her early years, she took care of me and my sister. When she did come back to the community, it was after a fairly messy divorce. She came back and she lived with her parents who were here in the community. and she started working through the WIOA program over at DEQ, actually. So she was there before I was there. And she was working on the EPCRA program, which for those of you who don't know, EPCRA is like it's a program around the community right to know. So it's essentially, hey, if there's someone who has chemicals in your community, you need to know what those chemicals are, and you need to be aware of like what the disaster plan is if those ever spill. So she was the one who started that program in DEQ and spearheaded that for a long time to get people engaged in the community around, hey, there's a bunch of chemicals here. My mom didn't speak the language. She knew a couple of words. I think most of us often know at least a couple of curse words that we grew up with. But sometimes we don't know the full context of those words. And so she would use them occasionally, but very rarely. One of the turning points in her life, though, that I think back a lot on, especially before she moved back to the community, she joined the Native American Church. So if you're familiar with the Native American Church, it's not like any specific tribe that church is related to. It's kind of a pan-indigenous. It's all tribes are together. The sacrament is peyote. But one of the things about that experience, I think, is that turned her on to, hey, I have this indigenous identity. I want to learn more about that. So when she came back to the community, this was back in like 94, 95, one of the things that we found as we were going through her things after she passed away was some of these old books that she had gotten from Barnaby, actually, who worked at Tippo. The story that I got from him was that she came to him when she first moved out here to the community and said, hey, I don't know anything about the community, but I want to learn. I want to learn more about what is our history, what is some of our past. She really wanted to learn about basket making because that was something she was interested in doing. She did a lot of arts and crafts growing up. She used to make us blankets, and she would make us little stuffed teddy bears. Still have some of those, and I think about that from time to time of like, this thing is 30 years old and still going strong. The ones from Amazon do not do that. And so he gave her some books, and she held on to those books. Some of those books, she went and she had these photocopies where she had these long papers of these books that were scanned that she would go back to from time to check on to learn more. And again, looking out at this crowd, I think most of you are aware of life before the internet, right? Today, it's kind of weird to think about that, that's the way that people found information. For us younger folks who are like, oh, the internet's been around for most of my life, the thought of having to go and scan pages is very interesting to me. And saving those things forever, because most of my life is digital. And I think for a lot of our younger generation, that's something that they experience too. The thought of information being hard to find for them is so foreign because they're growing up in this ecosystem where everything's at your fingertips. But I bring these stories up specifically with my mom. So a lot of this information that I'm gathering, that I'm learning about, is secondhand. My mom passed away very young. She passed away at 50 years old, 10 years ago now, 2014. I wish that I was a better son sometimes and had talked with her more about some of her history, her past, and how she got to the place that she did, but I didn't. And at the time, I'm gonna be real honest, before I had kids, it didn't seem that important. Now that I have kids, I think about it a lot of like, I hope my kids realize what the journey of our family was to get to where they are today, that connection to our ancestors. So, you might be asking, why am I starting here with this family history? When I was thinking about this talk, when I think about a lot of the projects that I do, and I'm going to show them to you and get to it, what I think about is that my family story is not unique, right? I think about the termination era of federal policies. So there was a policy from the federal government of trying to terminate reservations, trying to terminate tribes. And one of the practices that they had was, let's pay for training. But what we're gonna do is, if you wanna get trained, you go out to California, you go out to Texas, you go out to Portland, Oregon. And so one of the ways that one of the strategies that they used is spreading out our people. Now, our people also went out to lots of different places because they wanted to have a better life for themselves as well. During this time, roughly like 1920 to, most of you know the history of our water rights. Water was taken away, farming dried up. There was a lot of issues with a lot of the hunting grounds here in the community. They were hunted almost to extinction the wood stripped out because a lot of people were trying to feed their families and trying to survive. And so a lot of people left the community because they chose to. But I do want to recognize that there's a lot of folks who left the community because they didn't choose to, but they were forced to, right? So one of the things I think a lot about, and I work with a partner called Three Precious Miracles, and they work in the child welfare industry, right? They work with Native kids who are in the foster care system. Because there is this story of my grandma and my mom and that journey that they took leaving the community, but there's lots of our kids who get stuck in the foster care system. And before ICWA, it was just like snatch and grab. You had no rights as a parent, you had no rights as a community. And so for a long period of time, there was a lot of diaspora where people left the community, and a lot of times it was hard for them to get back. The other thing that I think about with this story, and I think about my privilege to be here today, and the privilege that I've had coming through the community, through the educational program, coming through the community socially, through my work, meeting people, amazing people who are doing amazing things, is the amount of rebuilding that I've been able to do. And I'm really grateful for that, because it's not me that's doing it. It's me being in a system where I have access to those things, where I have people who love me, who are trying to help me learn and to grow. But again, rebuilding takes time, and it's not easy. Those social connections take a long time to form, and a lot of times people don't have either the physical space because they're not here, or they don't have the time because they're working 2 or 3 jobs and trying to take care of their family. So the other thing I think about is the reconnection, once it is lost throughout your family, is very difficult. And then the third thing, and I talk about this a lot with my projects, because I know that this is probably a question that comes up. I know when I take these projects to council, when I take them out into the community, I get the question a lot of, well, how are you making sure no one else sees this? How are you making sure it's community members only? So I'd also want to talk about this, again, to set the foundation before we get into these projects. My children are not enrolled members. And so folks who are here, you understand blood quantum, you understand tribal enrollment. I think most of you do. If you don't, one of the things that a lot of tribes had to do because of federal policy, not internal policy, federal policy required us through the Indian Reorganization Act back in the 30s and 40s to enforce a blood quantum. Basically saying if you don't marry another Native American, a lot of tribes, it has to be the exact tribe. If you don't marry that tribal member, then your children are not enrolled in your community. They don't belong. Tribal belonging took a big hit from that. Now, our community, Gila River Indian community, where I'm from, Akimalatham, our ancestors, I really appreciate the work that they did. Because one of the things in our Constitution, it's not just 1/4 Akimalatham or Pipash, right? It was you're 1/4 Native American. One of the strategies that they tried to put into our early Constitution was how do we keep people attached and connected to our community as long as possible? And I do want to be clear, that was a very intentional act, right? To create a community, not just saying, hey, we are Akimalatham, we're not going to allow anybody else in. One of the things I also want to talk about, and I think about this a lot, is how our Constitution comes from a very long time ago. But our Constitution was not one of the earliest ones that were done. We took a little bit of time to sit and think about and talk about how we wanted to do things. But I talk about that because my kids are not community members. They're not enrolled, but they're Otham girls, and they'll be Otham women, and I'm going to raise them that way. But I think about this a lot because when I have questions around who gets to access some of these resources, that's the place that I come from, is that I was lucky enough and I lucked out and I'm privileged enough to have access to some of these things. All of it's public data. And I want to make sure that my kids still have that access and can learn as well. But beyond that, just my family, I think about, again, all the folks in diaspora who are outside of our community, who don't have access to an elder to talk to, who don't have access to coming here physically because they're in New York, Texas, LA, etc. And I think about how do we keep them connected? Because one of the reasons that the termination policy worked so well when we sent everyone out was it made it harder for them to come back. When we took kids away from through the foster care system was to make it harder for them to come back. When we talk about blood quantum, it makes it harder for them to come back, to connect, to belong, to assume the identity, the Otham identity. And so that's something that I fight a lot against because I think about what is our future. In 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, I don't want my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren to get stuck without being able to have access to their knowledge and culture and history. So, with that, sorry, I know that was like a heavy beginning, but I do want to say I like to start with that because I want folks to know my manifesto of like the way that I think. I know not everyone agrees, and that's okay. But I'm going to be doing a couple of projects. I have 5 projects, and I'm going to try to be respectful of your time and make sure that you have not have to sit here on these cold concrete steps too long. There's kind of 3 eras that these projects are in. Some of these projects are completely done. I shouldn't say completely done. All of my projects are work in progress. I'm still working on them. There's always better stuff that you can do, but they're mostly completed and they're put online. I have other projects that are drafted where they're pretty much done, but I have not put them out into the public yet because I'm still getting feedback from community members. I'm still getting feedback from my mentors and trying to figure out how I navigate some of the issues that I think about. And some of these projects I think on here might just be ideas. So these are things where like I haven't started them yet, or if I have started them, they're super, super early. So they're not fully completed yet. They're not even like in a place where I totally feel comfortable sharing them, but they might be in here as well. I've changed this slide deck a bunch of times, but I'm gonna get started. So one of the things that I have, and this is online right now. So if you go to leonardbruce.com under my projects, you can see this one up there. One of the first projects that I did actually, and this really got me started into learning about history and getting excited about it, was the GRIC Action Sheet Database. So if you're a political nerd, this is like all for you. What this is a database of the council action sheets from about 2008 to 2022-ish. And so what I've done is created a database that has all of the council actions that were publicly available. Again, all of my data is public. I don't grab any data from confidential sources or confidential archives because I'm not comfortable with that. But one of the things that I thought about with this database specifically was for community members to have access to what council is doing over time. So any community members here from Gila River know, if you ever want to learn about what council is doing, it's a process. If you're not tracking what's happening in the newspapers, you're having to go to the council secretary's office. You have to request those meeting action sheets. It's a whole thing. You have to fill out paperwork. But all of the information is online if you know where to look on our newspapers. And that's one of the things that I use to create this database. So one of the whys around this project, and I'm going to give a little bit of a why of like why I'm doing it. The why for this project is really because council is like the strongest institution we have here in the community, right? They make most of the decisions. And so for me, I wanted to give access to community members to learn more about what is happening in their community. What are some of those actions being taken? Because it's not always very clear and apparent. And so maybe this video will work. It does. I'm going to talk over this video as it's going. It's a very short video, maybe 30 seconds. This is kind of showing the layout of the action sheet database, and it shows kind of the breadth of information. There's over 2,000 entries here. Some of the things that I have on here, you can see what date was the council, what date was the GRIN. This is showing off one of the topical lookups, so you can see all those topics over there to the side. Let me see if I can pause this as it's rolling. If you look up here on the top, and it's kind of small, and I'll show this off if folks are interested in hanging out after the talk. I can show this more in depth. There's a lot of different tabs up here. So one of the things, if you've ever looked at the action sheets in the newspaper, it goes over the reports, it shows resolutions, unfinished business, new business, and some of the things I will show off in this video is related to that. But you'll see one of the things that I'm showing right here is one of the things that I like. It's going to show it right here. There we go, David White. If anyone remembers David White, shout out. Amazing community manager that we had a long time ago. What this is showing is one of the things that I've built into this database. This is a relational database. So the folks who are presenting, you can see what are some of the other things that they presented, what are some of the other topics that they've talked about or thought about over time. One of the reasons I wanted to do this, first of all, was I thought about the amazing human beings who are from our community, community members, non-community members, etc. Some of the projects that they've worked on over time, and how a lot of times they don't get recognition for that. They do these amazing projects, they create these amazing things, and then they don't put their names on it because it's just thought of, well, someone did it, we don't know. And so for me, this is also an effort to say, hey, if there's a project or a subject that you're interested in, like who came out and talked about that? So you'll see here, there's some of the reports that he's presented on over time. And again, I know I'm going fairly quickly through this. Resolutions, for those of you who don't know, resolutions are essentially council making a decision to do something and they're making it public. So this goes over some of the resolutions, both approving resolutions, designating resolutions, sometimes rescinding them. Ordinances are laws, so laws that were passed around our codes specifically. This shows when were those ordinances passed, when were they rescinded. Sometimes ordinances are not rescinded before new ones are put on, so that's always fun. Someone could analyze that, that would be cool. Unfinished business is something that they have seen before and they've tabled or they haven't gotten information on and they're still going. And new business is when they have new decisions to make. So what are some of the new subjects that are coming up that are being presented? I do want to stop right here really quick in just a moment. There we go. I love this. So as I was going through this, one of the things that I did was I went through every Grin issue for the last 15-ish years, since about 2008. Those are the ones that are publicly available. And I pulled out all of the stories that I thought were interesting. I did not pull out all of the stories. Trust me, there's a lot of them. Anyone who reads the Grin these days, they know most of it's fluff pieces about like, governor went to here and this building was opened. Amazing information. I didn't want to necessarily record all that. This by itself was a lot of work. But one of the things that I did was I pulled out all of these stories that I thought were just interesting. This is one of the stories that I always think back to, because I think, for those of you who don't know, when former Governor Rhodes, Bill Rhodes when he was in office, council tried to do recall elections a bunch of times. So there's a couple of times that they went through and were like, hey, we want to recall this guy. And one of the letters that was in the paper was from this inmate who had sent this letter into the Grin to be like, why are we doing this? You were spent, and what I put the number in here because I thought it was interesting because it gave a cost where he's like, hey, you spent over $50,000 on doing this recall election. Why are we doing this? And in the letter, he talks about, you've done this multiple times. So like, can you tell me, and he's an incarcerated man, right? And he's saying, hey, I'm still worried about my community because what is this doing to leadership and governance when you're recalling this guy and spending all this money? There's another article in here too where it talks about the total amount that was spent on recall elections. And it's a very high number. I don't want to like quote it, but I think it's in the millions of what we spent on trying to get this guy out of office from the council side, which is really interesting when you look at the makeup of our government today, which is not the point of this talk, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. But that's also a part of this, is that you can go through these articles and you can see what are some of these articles. Again, you might not find them all interesting, but I did. I thought it was really interesting to see some of them. Is this blurry up there as well? Yeah. Shenanigans. Okay. I'm probably going to pass it. So part of this is I'm working off of a hotspot right now, so the network is not my friend. But one of the things here is I'm showing you can go to different folks in this archive, this presenter lookup tab, and you can see like who are some of the people that presented. This is Art Felder. For those of you who don't know Art Felder, he was a treasurer for a lot of years here in the community. He still does stuff in relation with the community. But you can go through and see like what are some of the things that he talked about over time. He talked about internal audits. He talked about quarterly financial reports. A lot of this is super boring, and I recognize that. You got to be a special kind of political nerd to like get really investigated and involved in this. But my hope is to inspire other folks to become political nerds. So this is one of the reasons that I put this together. This last one, and again, I know it's super blurry, but it is showing some of the different topics that you can look up. So you can see COVID up there. You can look up culture. What were some of the cultural items that came up in council? You know, there's crime, there's different topics that I'm working on. This isn't totally built out, and I think that's the end of the video. This isn't totally built out. I've put together on my website, I have a bunch of blogs that I talk about the process of how I did this work, as well as what are some of the things that we could do better. So on this, a lot of these stories still need tagged. A lot of them need to be kind of organized, and spelling needs to be fixed. There's a bunch of stuff like that. But that's one of the projects that I did. I don't want you to play again. There we go. Okay, so this next one. I want a quick show of hands because I'm really curious about this. Does anybody know of Gila River Indian News? Who knows what the Gila River Indian News is? Oh, not that many. Holy moly. Okay. Man, this is going to be easier than I thought. Does anyone know has anyone read an issue of the Pima Maricopa Echo? Oh, Has anyone read an issue of the Gila River News from the 1960s? Yeah, that's a hard one. How about, does anybody even know about the Pima Gazette? Has anyone heard of the Pima Gazette? Yeah, that's a deep cut. So when I did that action sheet database, one of the things I was looking at was like, how far back can I go with these action sheets? When did we start doing that? First off, I found we don't locally have issues of The Last Grins past about 2008 that were public, right? We have them in paper form, they're just not digitized yet. So that was an interesting piece of this journey that I went through. But once I got started looking, I wanted to find like, how far back do these go? So one of the things that I started was this database, and I'll show it to you. But what this database is an inventory of the papers. I can't put copies of the papers on there, at least publicly, because of copyright issues. That's something I'm working on with council right now, of trying to figure out like, how can we do this? If you won't let me do it on my website, can you all do it through one of these institutions so that people can see these older newspapers? But I do want to notate that one of the reasons I started this is because when I started looking for these newspapers, I found we don't have a lot of them. Even here in the community, a lot of the Pima Maricopa Echoes, even a lot of our Gila River Indian news from the 80s and 90s, we don't have copies of them. And so as I went into this database, that's one of the things that I was thinking about. And the reason I started this project was because I was interested in how far back does it go that we can see what council was doing. But I was also really interested, as I talked about that story with the inmate, there were all these amazing stories from history that I was seeing that I was like, why don't we talk about these things? I'm really curious. Has anyone ever heard of FM4? Yeah, Bobby Stone. Thank you, Robert. It's funny because there's a very few folks who I've talked to remember that company. And that's a company out in Lone Butte, right? Yeah, and they worked with computers. So some folks might not know this. Gila River Indian Community, first off, we have GRTI, which goes back to the 80s, right? And that was originally a company that we bought, and that's how we started our work going into the internet and to telecom. And most of you might already know, Gila River Telecommunications, Inc. is the leader in Indian country for telecommunications.